Most people spend 4 decades building their first million. Very few spend any meaningful time understanding what that million actually becomes, the moment they stop working. At a standard 4% withdrawal rate, a $1 million portfolio generates roughly $40,000 per year. That is approximately $3,300 per month. Before taxes. Let that land for a second, because that number sits below the average American household's monthly housing cost, and well below what most people imagine their retirement would look like. This is not a personal failure. This is an arithmetic reality, one that the financial industry rarely explains clearly, and one that most governments prefer not to discuss. So today, I want to walk through what a $1 million retirement actually looks like. Not in theory, in practice, with taxes, inflation, healthcare, and the social dynamics that quietly drain portfolios faster than any market correction. There are 3 forces working against the $1 million retiree right now. Most people are aware of one, very few understand all 3, and fewer still understand how they compound against each other. The first force is real inflation, not the official number, the number people actually experience. For several years now, headline inflation figures have told one story. Grocery bills, restaurant tabs, insurance premiums, and property taxes have told a very different one. There is a meaningful gap between the consumer price index and what retirees actually spend money on. Healthcare, housing, food, transportation, these categories have, in many cases, risen at 2 to 3 times the official inflation rate. And that gap matters enormously for a retiree who will be drawing on that portfolio for 25 to 30 years. A 6% real inflation rate sustained over 20 years does not reduce your purchasing power by 6%. It reduces it by more than 70%. That $3,300 per month becomes something closer to $950 in today's dollars. This is not alarmism. This is compounding, working in reverse. The second force is tax drag. And this is the force that surprises people most. If your retirement savings sit in a traditional 401k or a Canadian RRSP, every dollar you withdraw is taxed as ordinary income. The $40,000 you pull from that portfolio does not arrive as $40,000. Depending on your other income sources, Social Security, CPP, OAS, dividends, part-time work, you could easily lose 20 to 28% of that figure to federal and state or provincial taxes. Now your $3,300 per month becomes something closer to $2,400 to $2,600. After decades of saving, the government still participates in every withdrawal. This is not the result of poor planning by individuals. This is the design of the tax-deferred system. You were encouraged to contribute pre-tax for decades, promised that your tax rate in retirement would be lower. For many retirees today, that assumption has not held. And this combination, real inflation plus tax drag, is the quiet math that turns a $1 million milestone into something more fragile than it appears. The third force is healthcare. In the United States, a couple retiring at 65 without employer coverage will spend, on average, well over $300,000 on healthcare costs across their retirement. In Canada, provincial systems absorb more of that cost, but long-term care, dental, vision, medications, and private supplemental coverage still represent a significant and growing line item. And here is what makes this particularly difficult to plan around. Healthcare costs are not linear. They are backloaded. The heaviest expenses arrive in the final years of life, exactly when the portfolio is most depleted, exactly when the ability to adapt is most limited. Now, consider something. I have spent a long time studying how financial systems interact with human behavior. And one pattern I have observed consistently is this. The people most vulnerable to these three forces are not the ones who saved too little. They are often the ones who saved just enough. The ones who hit that $1 million mark through discipline, sacrifice, and patience, and then faced a set of structural economic conditions they were never fully prepared for. The retiree with a defined benefit pension, even a modest one, absorbs these pressures differently. Because guaranteed income, inflation-indexed or not, provides a buffer the portfolio alone cannot. But defined benefit pensions have been declining for 30 years, in both Canada and the United States. The shift from employer-funded pensions to individual retirement accounts transferred an enormous amount of economic risk from institutions to individuals. And that transfer happened quietly, without much national conversation about what it would mean when tens of millions of people arrived at retirement simultaneously. We are living in that moment right now. Now let me talk about the social dimension, because this is where the structural problem becomes a personal one. When someone in your orbit learns that you have $1 million saved, they do not picture the arithmetic I just described. They do not picture tax drag. They do not picture healthcare backloading. They do not picture a carefully calibrated withdrawal strategy designed to last 3 decades. They picture abundance. And that perception gap is not entirely their fault. The word millionaire still carries cultural weight from an era when it genuinely represented extraordinary wealth. In 1980, $1 million had the purchasing power of roughly $3.8 million today. The word has not updated, the expectation has not updated, but the economic reality has changed dramatically. So when families, friends, and social circles discover that number, they apply an outdated cultural framework to a very different financial reality. And the retiree sits at the intersection of those two mismatched realities, asked to behave like someone from a different era, operating under the constraints of this one. The practical consequence of this gap appears in a predictable pattern. Small, emotionally reasonable requests that feel affordable in isolation. A few $1,000s to help a child through a difficult month, a contribution to a family trip, a loan that everyone intends to repay. Each decision feels minor. Each feels like the generous, obvious choice. But each decision is also an unplanned withdrawal from a finite system. And unplanned withdrawals compound. A portfolio supporting a 4% withdrawal rate can absorb expected expenses. It is much more vulnerable to the unexpected ones, especially in the early years of retirement. This is what analysts call sequence of returns risk. A significant withdrawal in a down market early in retirement can permanently alter a portfolio's trajectory. Not because of the market, because of the timing. The first 10 years of retirement are disproportionately influential on everything that follows, which means that early generosity, however well-intentioned, can produce consequences that only become visible years later. By then, the options are narrower, the adjustments are harder, and the stress is quietly present in every financial decision. So what does protecting a retirement actually look like? It begins with understanding that privacy is not secrecy. It is not dishonesty. It is the recognition that not every relationship requires complete financial transparency. Your financial planner needs to know your numbers. Your accountant needs to know your numbers. Your spouse or partner needs to know your numbers. The rest of your social world does not. And there is nothing cold or unkind about that boundary. It is, in fact, the responsible choice. Not just for your own retirement security, but for the health of those relationships themselves. Money rarely improves a relationship by being introduced into it as an expectation. It improves a relationship when it can be offered freely, occasionally, and on your terms. The retirees who navigate this well share a common approach. They treat their portfolio as an engine with a defined output, not a reservoir to be drawn from freely. They make decisions based on whether something fits the plan. not whether they technically have the money. And they understand that saying no to an unplanned request is not selfishness. It is stewardship. There is a phrase I find useful. This money is not savings, it is the machine that generates my income for the rest of my life. When you internalize that frame, and when you communicate it clearly to the people around you, the dynamic changes. The ask is no longer, "Can you spare it?" The ask becomes, "Can I ask you to reduce your own monthly income indefinitely?" Most people, when they understand the real question, stop asking. I will close with something worth sitting with. The challenge facing the $1 million retiree today is not fundamentally a personal finance problem. It is the visible outcome of policy decisions made over decades. Decisions about pension systems, about monetary policy, about inflation management, about the design of tax-deferred savings vehicles. Individual retirees did everything they were asked to do. They saved, they invested, they waited, and they arrived at retirement to discover that the rules of the game had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but consistently and significantly over time. Understanding that context does not solve the arithmetic, but it does change how you think about your choices. And in retirement, where every decision has a long tail, how you think matters as much as what you do.